time, can you please explain for the audience what did you want to change? What did you change about yourself? And what did you become in the process?
Hi, John. So look, the way I look at change, for me at least, it's been kind of ongoing since I was in my teens.
Good man.
And over the years there's been some significant changes and a series of smaller ones, of course. Um, the, so I think in my experience, at least for me, um, change was often driven by emotion, by feeling unsettled, by feeling that okay, something's got to change for me.
Very good.
And what I tend to do then is try and understand why, and then okay, well, what's the new direction, or what way am I moving? Is it a drastic change from who I am now to who I want to be, I guess. Um, and once I can understand what that is, then I can start to educate myself, figure out, what needs to be done. But for me, it's kind of seated in why am I changing? And look, you know yourself, change can be a very difficult um process for people. Uh, I don't find it as difficult because I'm very risk tolerant. It's just my personality type. Um, but I do need to understand that it makes sense that it's not change for change's sake, if you know what I mean. That
Of course.
it's important, it's relevant, it's meaningful.
Yeah, I know what you're saying there. And I've had experience of change in my own life. I suppose the biggest change I ever undertook was to leave the accountancy profession and to become a paid professional speaker and career coach.
Mm,
Journey has had its ups and downs, to be quite honest, but in more recent years, there's been far more ups than downs. And what I've learned from the whole experience is to embrace change, but more importantly, get yourself a coach or a mentor who has been on the same path as you have, that you want to
mm,
walk or travel. They have experience and they will guide you along the path to change.
mm.
The most important thing I would say to people is don't try and undertake a considerable change program on your own bat. Everybody needs support at some stage in life,
Absolutely.
but it's,
Absolutely.
yeah,
You make a very good point there, John, in terms of finding people that can help you with that. And I've had some wonderful mentors and coaches over the years. I've been that mentor and coach for other people.
good man.
It's a really important resource. And I think from in terms of how I look at it, and in my experience, in terms of the work I've done as well, um, change is primarily for people is about embracing discomfort. It's about kind of saying, yeah, okay, this is going to be, this could be really uncomfortable. I mean, a learning process for ourselves as an individual, and moving into like you did, moving from accountancy into professional speaking, for myself moving into that arena, that can be very uncomfortable. And that's where progress lies, right? That it's in embracing that discomfort. And you look at organizations that engage in change programs, and very often they don't take enough time to help people embrace that, because that happens at different paces for different people.
Yeah, of course.
um and obviously for some people it's quite quick, and they process it quickly, and they can dive in pretty quickly. But for other people it takes time, and they need an opportunity to get their questions answered. They need to find the logic and the sense in it. But yes, it's an uncomfortable process, and the more meaningful it is, or the bigger that it is in terms of how you see it, the more uncomfortable it is.
I was talking to a man there on Friday last, and he said to me, John, what I want you to do in 2023 is not just to stretch yourself. If you just take the example of an elastic band, he said, I don't want you to stretch that elastic band. I want you to break it. I want you to ramp up your
Mm.
efforts this year, John. That's what he said to me, straight to my face, too. And
Yeah.
there you go. And I do agree with you that within the corporate world, I've seen plenty of change programs, and some of them have been change for change's sake, but others have been more fundamental. And what I often found was within these change programs, you have three groups of people. You have the people who would be the captains of change. They see a
Hmm.
benefit in getting on board with this change program, and they're all for change. They're fully on board. Then you have, I suppose a large part of the population, the silent majority of the workplace, they've got a mortgage to pay, they have rent to pay, they have families to raise. They'll keep their head down and they'll do their work and they will just get on with it without raising
Mm,
their heads and causing any fuss. And then you have a small group of people, and I was in this group myself, where you feel that change is impacting you as a person because your your little your section of work is dwindling. You're getting less
mm,
and less work to do. In fact, you're probably one of the people who's losing out from change. You feel demotivated. You feel there's no future for you in this organization, and you feel then it's time to move on, or else you're staring redundancy in the face.
mm.
It's those people are the people that need the most coaching or mentoring or counseling in
Mm.
organizations, because the last thing you want to do is let them go and all of a sudden they have no purpose in life. That's a big
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I want to come back to the redundancy thing in a second because I think that's pertinent with what's going on in the world at the moment. But when we think about change, um, the systems processes thing, a part of change, that's actually the really easy bit. It's easy to rewrite a process or redesign something like that. The big challenge with change is people. Always has been, always will.
correct.
That will always be the biggest part of it. And I think, particularly corporates don't manage the people element of it as well as they could, which brings me back around to the redundancy piece. So, we're hearing an awful lot. I'm actually writing a piece on this at the moment. We're hearing an awful lot about particularly tech companies
True.
making people redundant. So again, it's never nice to have to do it. I've had to do it myself, and it's unpleasant and it's uncomfortable. But what we're seeing is, I mean, from big organizations like Google and Salesforce and Facebook, the first people know about their redundancy is that they don't have access to their systems and they get an email saying that they've been made redundant. Now, that's not handling change well. That's not having any consideration for the people, the human beings involved, right? And this is on a large scale. I think uh, Google was the most recent. Was that 12,000 people?
I
Something
think
in
so.
that something in that area anyway. Who basically found out because they couldn't access the systems, and then they got an email to say that they'd been made redundant. That's horrific. That's a horrible way to engage in change. That hasn't considered the people element of that at all. And that's really poor from organizations who speak so much about their culture, and they engage in what I call culture PR, which is essentially telling people what they want them to hear to get them to apply for a job. But they lose the right to talk about culture now. They absolutely do. And that is going to have um, ongoing damage within their organization, because it's going to impact engagement, it's going to impact retention, it's going to impact performance. So they haven't thought it through. So somebody there decided that it was too uncomfortable to sit down, or to have leaders sit down with people and tell them that they were going to be made redundant. So let's send them an email instead. That way we don't have to feel uncomfortable.
I know in the case of Twitter employees, what happened there was when they went to get access to the building, they were locked down.
Yes,
Security passes were disabled. But more importantly, the laptops they were working on from home had been cleaned remotely by people within the IT or security
I had
departments.
heard that. Yeah,
So effectively they were pushed out the door and they were told goodbye unceremoniously, I suppose you could say. Yeah, yeah. And people have given good service to these organizations, and
absolutely.
they feel as if they've been just dumped on. I suppose that's one way of looking at it. Yeah,
I
yeah.
read a, I read a few posts on LinkedIn recently from people who had been made redundant in Google, um, who had been with the company 15 years in one case, 16 years in another. That's a long time. That's the bulk of somebody's career, and then to be treated like that, is horrible. And that's change handled really,
Yeah.
really poorly. And I'm not sure who's responsible for it. Um, but in these cases, you have to look at the top of the tree. So that, the CEO has overseen that. I'm sure the CEO would have had a fairly large involvement in the redundancy of 12,000 people, or however many thousand it is.
Yeah.
It's just very, very poorly handled.
True. Moving on. So what did you become as a result of all the change that you've undertaken in your working life and personal life?
I'm a very different human to the human I was when I was 20. Um, you know, in college, if you'd asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have said a millionaire. I didn't really think about how in any great detail, wasn't too bothered.
Yeah.
And I made some poor decisions. Yes, I made lots of money, but I made some poor decisions that impacted me personally. And I had to make new decisions to find myself again. Um, and that was very, very challenging at times, even for me, who's somebody who's quite comfortable with this kind of stuff. In general, this was an immensely and deeply uncomfortable process. Um, I ended up walking away from a business that I'd been a part of, growing to something significant, um, with nothing, because I needed to do that. That was an important thing for me to find myself again. To kind of live my own values and understand, first of all, understand what they were, and then live my own values. That was probably the biggest change I've had to make in my entire life, my 48 years. Um, but it made me a much happier human. I do work now that I really love to do. Um, I continue to work myself as I have done since, in one form or another, since 2005, but more on my terms than somebody else's. Uh, I think the biggest thing for me is doing work that I really love to do.
Good man.
You
So
know.
going back to my own days in college, which were many years ago, of course, I think, you know, third level education in those days was very much about the academia, and it
Hmm.
wasn't about personal development as such. And a lot of people graduated from university or from college, they went into the workforce and they found out pretty quickly they were in the wrong profession. And I think it was
Hmm.
a case of lack of career guidance in schools and throughout universities and colleges. And people then were faced into making some hard decisions about their lives. Should they continue on the route they were going, or should they look to alternative routes? But just go
Mm.
back there to what you said there a minute ago, Brian, where you left a business with nothing. Would you like to expand on that for the audience, please?
Um, as much as I can, I will. I, 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 I got involved in a business with some people that um, uh, we had a different perspective on particularly on how people should be treated. Um, and that started to impact me fairly severely. It changed me, actually, uh, in ways that I'm not proud of. Um, and it resulted in anxiety. I wasn't in a good place. I wasn't in a good place, and
And
very, it became very evident to me that I needed to, I needed to walk away. And before I walked away, I started retraining and doing various things that would help me. Um, but but it was very clear to me that I had to walk away, because if I didn't, I was spiraling, and I was going. I would regret it if I didn't. So, so it was forced upon me, in some sense, forced upon me by myself, I guess. Our bodies and brains are very intuitive. They'll be sending us signals all the time about what's working for us and what's not, and it's important to listen to that. It took me a while to listen, but I did eventually, and I'm very glad I did.
I know what you're saying there, that you were probably in a business setup situation that was growing, but you were working with people who had a slightly different perspective on the business world than you did. And their
Mhm.
perspective effectively wasn't aligned to your values. And they were
That's
probably more
exactly it.
dominant individuals within the business. And therefore,
Um,
yeah,
well, you see what it was, John, was it was a family business. I was the only non-family member on the board. Um, so it felt like a fight all the time. And you're bang on. The values were different, and that values conflict creates stress. Um, and I was almost the only different one, as it were. So, yeah, that it was particularly challenging. It was very challenging. But again, I'm glad it did. I don't hold any ill will or any animosity, but it is what it is, and people will be people, and they'll be themselves. Um, that responsibility was on me. That I have to own that, and that's really important. Um, but but walking away from it was a good thing for me. No, I don't want to suggest that I didn't learn anything in that process, and that I didn't enjoy the business element of it. I did. Uh, but yeah, the impact it was having on me as a human was too great.
Yeah, I know what you're saying there, that you enjoyed, getting the business off the ground, growing the business. But what you didn't enjoy was the personal interaction,
Exactly.
with your fellow business owners. That was the troublesome part for you. And you felt that it was just stressing you out. You had to move on and find something else to do for your life.
Hmm. Yeah, and the idea at that point of going in, I spent about 5 years in corporates, which I enjoyed. Don't get me wrong, but I knew
Yeah.
it wasn't for me. And the prospect of going back into a corporate again, it didn't appeal to me at all. I knew I wanted to work for myself and do my own thing, but just to be in control of it, I suppose, in many ways. So that's what I did.
Good man. So if you were to go back to the corporate world again, what would you say to yourself?
If I was to go back there,
Yeah.
oh God, there's a good question, John. What would I say to myself? Right, the way where I am now, I think I would almost see it as a failure on my part.
Yeah.
If I felt I needed to go back there. But if I was to go back, I would be much stronger in terms of the corporate I would choose, and the terms on which I would do it.
Yeah.
I'd have to be very clear about my expectations. Um, I've learned because I do an awful lot of work with corporates as clients. I've learned an awful lot about how they work, and particularly the more senior levels. So that would certainly equip me, in terms of of setting terms and understanding what goes on.
So you've had a lot of experience working in the corporate world. You've grown and started businesses, Brian. What advice, if you were asked to give a 3-minute conversation on change, what advice would you give to that audience?
I think the most important advice would be to take your time and allow people time to adjust, answer all of their questions, even the ones that you might think are inane or silly or small. They're not inane or silly or small to the person asking. Take the time, answer the questions, come up with a clear, transparent plan, let people see that plan. And then, you've got to get them on board with this, because change will work really, really well if people can engage with it. And we've got to allow time, and energy for people to engage with it. We've got to be able to give them the information that they need in order to make that leap from being resistant to this change to, okay, I get it now, I'm in, let's go. Um, so I think it's primarily a people exercise. As I said before, the systems process is part of that, is much easier than the people part of that. But bringing the people on board, taking that extra bit of time to make sure that the people affected by it are on board with it, will speed up the process on the back end.
I know what you're saying there, and there's no harm. I think you're right there, to be honest, Brian. They have to bring on board the people you feel are going to struggle with change. Don't
Mm-hmm.
just give them answers for the sake of giving them an answer. I remember one time a man saying to me, John, stick around here for this with this organization for another 6 months, and then if you don't like change, you can leave.
Mm.
I said that to myself. That's just an answer for the sake of an answer. That's not a genuine answer. He,
It's kind of an ultimatum in many ways, John, isn't it?
yeah, yes,
In other words, what he's saying is this change is going to happen whether you like it or not.
yeah,
So if you don't like it, well, off you go. No
yeah,
problem. We won't miss you.
yeah,
And I think that's I understand where that's coming from, but I just think that is really poorly worded. There's a lot more that could be done
yeah,
to ease that, right?
yeah,
To
of
to
course.
to actually get you on board than giving you a kind of silly answer like that. That's yeah, I agree. That's an answer for the sake of an answer.
True, yeah, that's very corporate answer, I suppose you could say. Yeah, indeed.
I mean, I think we think, and something I would certainly talk a lot about is emotional intelligence and the importance of emotional intelligence for a leader. It's probably the most important set of tools that there are, and it's something you can learn, right? Um, I think there's an awful lot of leaders and change leaders as well that don't have that emotional intelligence, that they they haven't taken time to learn it, they haven't taken time to exercise it, whatever it might be, and that connecting with other people and learning to understand how somebody else is experiencing something can really bring an awful lot of understanding and compassion and engagement.
Yeah,
And I don't want to I don't want to make this all kind of woo woo and pink clouds and sunshine and rainbows and all this, because it's not. But
correct.
this is basic human connection, right? And it matters. It's impactful. It's relevant, um, and we need to do better.
True. Agree with you. This has been a very interesting conversation today, Brian. So the key points I can take away from this conversation today on behalf of the audience are change is ongoing in business, and the rate of change is ongoing in business, and it's getting faster by the day. But how we communicate change can decide, you know, how we communicate change can make or break a company in terms of
Mhm.
its PR exercises. We've seen in the very recent past where people were told via email their job is being made redundant or their laptop was wiped clean. It wasn't communicated to them very well. These people were upset by it. I think also change, you have to listen to people and their concerns in a genuine way and be sensitive to their needs. Don't just give corporate answers to people, because people see through that if you're being
Mhm.
genuine or not. And I think it's most important to be upfront with people, be genuine, understand why they're struggling with change and get them the help they need. Don't just park it aside or say to them, stick around for 6 months. And if you don't like it, then you can leave. That's
Mhm.
not being genuine with people. That's just giving corporate answers for the sake of giving an answer to a person.
Mhm.
Also, a change, you have to really step out of your comfort zone and stretch yourself and break that elastic band and learn new skills. That's what we've done over the past couple of years, yourself and myself, Brian. And that's what I
Mhm.
advocate to the audience. Don't overthink change. Get yourself a coach or a mentor and embrace a constructive challenge. Find your purpose and grow new skills, because the more skills we have in the workplace, whether it's in self-employment or in the corporate world, the more employable we are. And also we can learn new life skills by embracing a constructive challenge and taking on a new career direction. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience before I let you go, Brian?
No, I think we've said it all there, John. I think we can do change better than we should, and it's just about embracing that discomfort. Not
Yeah.
easy. It is simple, but it's not easy.
And on that
It is,
note,
and it is worth it. Sorry, I should say.
yeah, yeah. And on that note, I shall bring today's conversation to a close. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, John.